I love horizontal drilling. It's just revolutionized our industry. We need all the energy we can get, especially if you want to fire up electric vehicles. If you don't have power, those electric vehicles are going to be in kind of bad shape. So I like the idea of nuclear, especially small nuclear reactors. In San Juan County, we just shut down one of our power plants and coal mines prematurely. Really unfortunate. We're losing 1,500 jobs. I love to see those jobs transition to the nuclear business.
Just because the facts are A, if the narrative is B and everyone believes the narrative, then B is what matters. But it's our job in our industry to speak up proudly, soberly, and to engage people in this dialogue. Those 2.5 billion people that are in energy poverty, they need us.
America cannot meet this threat alone.
If there is a single country,
of course, the world cannot meet it without America.
that is willing to
But we're going to need you, the next generation, to finish the
overhaul
job.
nuclear regulation
We need scientists to design new
and
fuels.
focus on net public
We need
benefit
engineers to invent new technologies. We
over absurd levels of radiation
need
protection,
entrepreneurs to sell those
then
technologies.
we will march towards this.
We need workers to operate assembly lines that hum with high-tech,
we
zero-carbon
have
components.
unlimited prosperity for all humans.
We need diplomats and businessmen and women and Peace Corps volunteers to help developing nations skip past the dirty phase of development and transition to sustainable sources of energy. In other words, we need you.
Today I'm joined by two guests. We normally only have one, but today we've got two. We have Mr. James Strickler. James is a seasoned oil and gas professional. He said that he's on his 46th year working in the industry. He's got a business degree in petroleum land management and also served in the New Mexico state legislature for about 16 years. He's still a small independent producer out of Farmington. And our other guest is Larry Scott, who is an electrical engineer by training, but also spent 40 years working as an independent as an oil and gas producer in southeast New Mexico. And he also served in the New Mexico state legislature. So, Larry, James, how you guys doing?
Doing great.
Terrific. It's Friday afternoon.
Friday afternoon, yeah. Larry was, before we started recording, he's apparently also an accomplished pilot and was complaining that this is cutting into his time to going out and hanging out at the hangar and flying. So we'll try and be efficient here. I'd like to give each of you kind of the 60-second intro or ability to just kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background, but also to help the audience just kind of familiarize themselves for those that are just listening to know who is who. So, James, let's start with you.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure to be here. Love energy. I'm from Texas and I've been in the oil and gas industry for 46 years and the last 28 years here in San Juan County. And I worked the San Juan Basin, worked for major companies. Most recently was El Paso, Meridian, Burlington Resources. I've been on my own the last, tomorrow will be my 19th anniversary. So I'm a petroleum landman, as you mentioned earlier. And I love my industry, and I love the folks up here in San Juan County that work in the coal mine and the power plants, and they produce an abundant supply of energy. And we, serving 16 years in the legislature, just finished up last year, 2007 to 2022, 16 years on the energy committee, and I served as chairman for 2 years, 2015 and 16. So got pretty good understanding of overall energy mix in New Mexico and in the country. I love horizontal drilling. It's just revolutionized our industry. We need all the energy we can get, especially if you want to fire up electric vehicles. If you don't have power, those electric vehicles are going to be in kind of bad shape. So I like the idea of nuclear, especially small nuclear reactors. In San Juan County, we just shut down one of our power plants and coal mines prematurely. We can talk about that later. Really unfortunate. We're losing 1,500 jobs. I love to see those jobs transition to the nuclear business.
Mark, I come from an oil and gas family. My father had a 35-year career with a major oil company, mostly in the offshore Gulf of Mexico. And that is where I spent probably the first 8 years of my career was working on offshore production facilities. Transferred to southeast New Mexico. I started my own company back in the early 80s and grew it to a 60 well operation. And now, with the bulk of that sold, I am in semi retirement, serve in the New Mexico legislature, and also have served since I've been in the legislature on the Energy Committee. So this is a subject that holds a lot of my interest.
So Larry, working on the Energy Committee, what was that like? What kind of issues would you guys address? Give us some background perspective on that.
Well, Mark, our current administration, the New Mexico legislature is very, very progressive, as is our current governor. And just in the last couple of years, we have passed over my objection the Energy Transition Act, which aims to bring New Mexico to a position of net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050. I consider this to be an unrealistic and very expensive goal to reach, and continue to work to try to mitigate some of the consequences of that legislation. So that's what we've been faced with in New Mexico.
Do they have a strategy for that, or I mean, it, I know there's a lot of sun in New Mexico, but every time that I've tried to scope the economics of solar projects, it doesn't seem to pan.
Well, of course, solar panels are only good for about 25% of the 24-hour period. And the lack of dispatchable power, once renewables get into that 25 to 30% penetration range, makes dispatchable power priceless when that renewable energy is not available. And I think the consequences to our consumers are going to be considerably negative. And I'm going to read that as less reliable and more expensive.
Yeah, I agree. So what's your background, Larry? You were an electrical engineer, but how'd you get into oil and gas?
Oh, upon graduation from college, we were in the midst of one of those oil and gas cycles that was desperately in need of technical talent of really any major. And my early career was in providing power systems for offshore oil and gas production platforms. Of course, in an oil company, if they like the work you're doing, they cross train you to do oil and gas activities, which is how I ended up in southeast New Mexico as a supervising engineer. A lot of people making $1 million deals on cocktail napkins that didn't look a whole lot smarter than me, and seduced by an oil and gas boom back in the late 70s to try my hand at my own oil and gas company.
Well, that's great, right? It is one of the industries, or it was for a long time, one of the only industries that true entrepreneurship led to generating wealth that was almost generational, right?
That opportunity has largely gone by the wayside with the capital requirements for this new technology, but I am a representative of an entrepreneur that did well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. James, tell us a little bit more about your background. Working as a landman in New Mexico.
Well, the oil and gas industry is high risk, and I've been laid off twice in my career.
It's a rite of passage.
So that's kind of it's a common occurrence. I was first laid off in '94, and then laid off again in 2004. And the second time, I decided to go in business for myself, and I just picked up scraps off the rich man's table. I acquired oil and gas leases in good areas here in the San Juan. Got really established, made some good acquisitions, and the industry's been really great. And my wife and I raised 7 kids. 2 of my older sons are in the oil and gas business as well. They're both professional landmen, Texas Tech graduates. And so it's been really good business for me. I love this health and safety, the practices that the industry has continued to improve on. We're environmentally sensitive to everything that we do. And I become very close to the coal miners and the power plant workers in my community because we have 2 very large coal mines and power plants. And Representative Scott mentioned the Energy Transition Act, and that pretty much prematurely shut down the San Juan generating station that P&M Public Service in New Mexico operates. And it was a terrible piece of legislation. This plant has a 25 year plus life remaining, and P&M decided to shut it down 3 or 4 years, early, and 20 years prematurely, and it really adversely affected our economy, and we've lost again. It's the livelihood of 1,500 jobs, and the tax base has really taken a beating, especially Central Consolidated Schools, which is a 90% Navajo community student body, and so and 40% of the workforce came up with the Navajo community. It's very important, and so we're reeling right now. So this nuclear power, in reading some of the material that you were kind enough to furnish me, 70+% of these coal-fired power plants are ideal for small nuclear reactors because of the infrastructure that's already in place and the quality workforce. We've got a lot of high technical folks that can transition. Like 70% of the workforce can easily transition in the nuclear side, these small nuclear reactors. So I'm pretty fired up that I want to save these jobs.
I love the passion and the commitment to the people that are on the ground and that, have had a good career in economic prosperity in a community and have done a lot for society. But then, like you said, because of political powers shift in one way or the other, it transforms what people are allowed to do for a living, which can be very sad. I want to unpack a lot of that, but before we dive in, James, I looked at some of the bills that you had researched previously or had proposed previously, and I feel like the legislator and the attitude in the state of New Mexico is kind of transformed over time. I'd love to get your guys' kind of perspective. Is that true? Would you say in, call it, the past 5 to 15 years, the state's politics have kind of moved towards being more strict on the energy industry than not? And if so, why?
I'd like to answer that real quick because I've had the privilege of serving under 3 governors and my colleague Larry Scott under 2. Under Richardson, Senator Governor Bill Richardson, former Congressman Bill Richardson, he was fairly pro-business and pretty good, pretty reasonable with the oil and gas industry, for example. He was more of a moderate, and he was running for president, and it moderated his views. And the Speaker of the House, Ben Lujan, was liberal, but he was pro-business. And kind of interesting dynamic. Same thing with Michael Sanchez, who was the Senate Majority Leader. But we had to do something. We had to balance the budget, so he did a pretty good job. We had a big budget shortfall, and we balanced the budget. We had to come up with $700 million, and it was painful, but it happened. Under Susana Martinez, a Republican, she was a good balancing individual that had a veto pen, and so if bad legislation got through, she was able to stop that. So we had checks and balances really the first 12 years of my career. The last 4 years, unfortunately, the moderate Democrats have been swept out of office. And so we don't have that balance. The last 4 years have been tough. And MLG, Michelle Lujan Grisham, has not been very, very friendly to the largest industry in our state, private sector industry in our state. Representative Scott and I also serve on the tax committee. And 40% of our revenues come from oil and gas. So it's kind of, it's a little bit strange that you would want to hurt that industry because you can't replace those dollars. And we've got a three plus billion-dollar surplus thanks to oil and gas. So you don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And I think Larry and his colleagues have done a brilliant job this last session. I wasn't there, but they were able to stop a lot of bad bills. And he'll have to talk about that. But that's kind of the history of the last 15 years anyway.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Larry, do you want to talk about a couple of them? Things that come to mind?
The current administration, and Mark, I've made this comment on more than one occasion, and that it does not seem like the current political environment has any adults in the room, at least not those driving the bus. Because, as Representative Strickler mentioned, the petroleum industry, directly or indirectly, is responsible for almost $4 billion out of a state budget of $9 billion. So to say that that industry needs to sunset in favor of renewable energy just doesn't make a lot of sense, because we have nothing on the horizon that would come remotely close to replacing that economic activity.
Yeah. What I know the answer, but for the benefit of the audience, why couldn't we do that with renewables? Why doesn't that value exist with renewables as you guys see it?
Well, so far, renewables have not been a generator of taxes to the state government. They've been a consumer of taxes to the state government. Those projects would not exist without some sort of government subsidy at both the federal and state levels. They are constructs, if you will, of the environmental community and their obsession with carbon dioxide.
So why wouldn't they exist? My perception is the physics just aren't as good. You don't get as much out as you put in for every dollar that you invest. And so no matter what you do.
If you're not getting as many BTUs out of the project as what you have to put into the project, you are never going to make that up on volume.
So we've alluded to nuclear a few times. Do you think there's opportunity in New Mexico to bring new nuclear in?
I do not. The current hostility towards nuclear energy goes back all the way into the 40s, in spite of the fact that we have Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratory.
Yeah, the OG lab, right, where Oppenheimer went and invented nuclear energy as a science, right?
There you have it. And I'll give you a very recent example. My community supported an outfit that has very advanced technology to store in a semi-permanent manner spent nuclear fuel rods. This is a nationwide problem that we here in the southeast part wanted to try to solve. And the legislation coming out of the House and signed by the governor actually precluded that installation going forward without state regulatory approvals, which will not be forthcoming. Those folks have spent a considerable amount of money, and right now it looks like it's all going to be for naught.
This is the Holtec facility, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So that it's essentially a worthless concrete pad then. So if anyone's not familiar, it's a several acre, or it's designed to store the dry cask storage. And we've had a waste expert on that, has talked about this. Super safe, literally hasn't hurt anyone ever, and will not be hazardous to anyone after several hundred years. And this would just be a place to put it, So I find it very strange that, well, ignorant might be the word, that people would oppose that. Okay, well, James, you had mentioned the San Juan generating station and that they closed that prematurely. Tell us a little bit about the station, if and Larry, you might know this, but size of the station.
And you mentioned 1,500 jobs. Was there a coal
mine next to it? Give us some color on kind of what the project was and why they closed it.
I'll be happy to, Mark. The San Juan Generating Station is, again, it's operated by Public Service of New Mexico. The city of Farmington owns a minority interest, 5-6%. All the owners decided to exit their ownership interest. And the city of Farmington, under the operating agreement, agreed to take over the entirety of the plant. So they secured a partner to operate the plant. And this partner is Enchant Energy, and Enchant Energy had a bold and creative project to do some carbon capture, and they were kind of ahead of their time. This was in 2018, 2019, and carbon capture is the rage right now. The industry is really embracing carbon capture, and they were way ahead of the game, 3 or 4 years ahead of the game. And it's a big industrial project, $1.2 billion to construct the facility. There's currently 800 megawatts of power. Two of the 4 units are in operation. To give you a magnitude, it's a pretty good size. Used to be 1,600 megawatts. They shut down 2 of the 4 units. And this was an ideal project. The Department of Energy ranked it high on their list. They gave some grants. A test well was drilled to sequester, to capture the carbon and sequester it. What was so phenomenal about it, the technology's there. They were going to put, some mini units, redundant units. So like 4, and if one's down, 3 are going, and it strips 90% of the carbon. And so currently the power plant, coal mine, they were generating about 2,100 pounds of carbon per megawatt hour. And with this system in, it'd be down to 300. And so it would be, ironically, it would be cleaner than wind and solar with natural gas to back it up, which is about 600 pounds per megawatt hour. And it's kind of ironic. And we could sell all this electricity to California. It would comply with their rules. By the way, California, they've recognized natural gas as clean energy because most of their power is generated by natural gas. And so this was an exciting project in state government, just like Representative Scott was talking about Holtec in that storage facility. The state government just really hurt this great opportunity.
Yeah, what was the primary driver behind not doing this carbon capture project? Why not?
Well, I think the powers that be, the environmentalists, they hate coal. I mean, they just hate coal. They hate oil and gas too. They just hate coal more than they hate oil and gas. But believe me, they hate all of it. And unfortunately, wind and solar is just not going to cut it. As Representative Scott said, solar runs about 25% of the time. We didn't mention this, but wind runs about 45% of the time. So you use an average of 35%. You need natural gas to back it up, or small nuclear power. And so you got to have base load, 24/7 fuel, because wind and solar is just the physics. I mean, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. Those are just facts. But these environmentalists, at least that Larry Scott and I have been dealing with, don't bore them with the facts. They haven't taken a math course recently, and they need to.
Who are these specific groups? Who would you guys interface with? Or are they individuals in the legislature?
Oh, they're nonprofits. I mean, they're
big names: Greenpeace, Sierra Club.
They're the Sierra Club. Yeah, the Sierra Club is one of them. The Conservation Voters is kind of a combination of all these different groups. They're very well organized, very well financed, and we're all going to die in 20 years.
Well, I think their whole business model is selling fear and catastrophe to people that want to do good in the world and will make donations to them. And it's like wind and solar, as far as an environmental project, are disasters, right? For how much land use and mining they require. Like, this is really, really bad for and I think the public can still be fooled by that now, and people can make careers and build nonprofit organizations off of selling the dream of wind and solar because it's not apparent yet. But in areas that wind and solar has higher deployments, and it's more visible, people do have more pushback.
Mark, in Europe, wind and solar does not work. It's just too cloudy, and they don't have the sun resource, and they don't have the wind power. And we're trying to follow the European model, which has been an abysmal failure. And with the Ukraine-Russian war, it really has been, in the forefront, and they're paying 3 times more for energy than we are, and we're trying to do the same dumb thing. And believe me, the eastern part of the United States, they don't like wind towers. I can tell you that. And like you said, we don't have enough land available for solar farms. Out west, we do. I mean, we have a lot of desert here, and we have a lot of good solar sites here. So more so, but boy, where most of the people live, east of the Mississippi, it's tough.
Absolutely. Now, the San Juan generating station, let's circle back to that. Do you know the mine land specifically? Are they just going to reclaim it? This was an open pit mine?
This is an underground mine.
Underground mine. Okay.
But to your point, there's a surface mine that provides fuel, coal to Arizona Public Service, and they're doing the right thing. They've got 10 to 15 years to come up with an alternative.
Okay, so there's an underground mine that was feeding the San Juan generating station, and but it's mined in New Mexico, and then they train it over to Arizona?
There's 2 coal mines. The underground mine serves the P&M facility, San Juan generating station. The surface mine provides coal for Arizona Public Service.
Okay, gotcha.
Arizona Public Service has their facility on site. It's at the mouth of the mine. So Arizona Public Service is located in San Juan County. It's at the mouth of the mine. It's going full speed ahead, and they're glad to have it. It serves Arizona and Nevada, and they're glad to have that available power.
And they didn't close that plant, right? So this is a perfect contrast, right, between like coal mine adjacent to each other, two power plants very close to each other, and one shuts down, lose a bunch of jobs, lose power generation. The other one doesn't, and who's making more money? Who has more jobs? Which economy is better?
Mark, in the last year of operation, San Juan, according to the Energy Information Agency, was putting up about something less than 5 million metric tons of CO2 annually. And we closed that down in the name of saving the environment, but the math very simply doesn't work because 5 million metric tons in the scope of the worldwide CO2 emissions is not even a rounding error. It works out to 4 decimal places in the scope of the planet's atmosphere. So to sacrifice 1,500 jobs for that little a benefit didn't seem like,
Without a viable backup plan, right?
with no viable backup.
This is a phrase that is thrown around a lot now, a just transition. Like, well, we, as the imperial, federal or state government, we can't just come down and take people's jobs away without having a solution, but that's what's happening all over the country right now, right?
P&M came up with, I think, $40 million in the legislation intended to provide, if you will, a just transition for those folks that were losing their jobs, which amounted to about half of the annual payroll that was lost as a consequence of closing the plant and the mine down.
Yeah, that's tough. Now, Larry and James, I'd sent a paper to you guys ahead of time, and one of your colleagues had sent it to me. But it was a report put out by the Bipartisan Policy Center titled, Can Advanced Nuclear Repower Coal Country? Larry, I don't know if you had a chance to look at this, but I guess a question that I have, and James, you cited that the plant could be potentially converted to nuclear. I guess I'd ask Larry, do you agree with that? Or from your technical background, do you think that there's opportunity for some of these coal?
All a power plant needs to generate electricity is a source of steam. And to the extent that nuclear power can provide that steam, they absolutely make those old plants candidates for repowering because those turbines don't care where the steam comes from as long as there's enough of it.
So why didn't PNM convert it to a nuclear power plant? Do you guys have any insight on what their motives were?
Well, P&M, Mark, P&M had to replace this 800 megawatts of power. And so they applied to the Public Regulatory Commission in New Mexico to buy that replacement power from Palo Verde nuclear power plant. So they're strong, nuclear. I mean, they're already doing it.
They're already doing it.
And the PRC, for some weird reason, turned them down. And because they thought it would cost too much. Well, now, the cost of everything has gone up, whether it be natural gas or even coal's gone up. I mean, coal is going full speed ahead as far as production and worldwide power. I mean, coal is the king of energy production. And so I think P&M, saw low hanging fruit there. They wanted to buy 150 megawatts of replacement power from Palo Verde that was available at a reasonable price. And the PRC turned them down.
And you use this acronym a couple of times, PRC. What does PRC stand for?
So, Public Regulatory Commission. They're the regulatory authority that governs all these power plants. Of course, these are regulated monopolies. They have a trade area, and that's the Public Regulatory Commission's responsibility. And so P&M, I mean, why build a new plant when you can buy it from an existing plant? And these small nuclear reactors I think they're ideal because they're like 70 megawatts a unit. And, you can put in 4 or 5 units and be in great shape. But Larry has.
Mark, I want you to think about the economics of renewables as opposed to dispatchable power plants. When the sun's shining and or the wind is blowing, these guys have to have some place to go with the power that is generated. And as a consequence, and this is already occurring in California, the generators pay to transmission companies to take that power because they have to do something with it. Now, a dispatchable plant that can consistently put kilowatts on the grid for, say, 4 cents or 6 cents per kWh cannot compete. And those plants have to be designed to run at maximum efficiency, which means they would be designed to run at, say, 90% of their productive capacity all the time. So trying to cycle these guys back and forth to match what renewables are able to put on the grid more cheaply at certain times of the day is problematic. You can't get a return on investment of building nuclear or coal or natural gas or anything else when uh, perhaps 30% or 40% of the time it's going to have to sit there idle because it's sunny. It's a, it's a, it's a problem that I don't see an easy solution around.
Okay, well, Larry, I'm very familiar with your part of the world, and Hobbs and Lee and Eddy County in southeast New Mexico are incredible energy powerhouses, right? You've got WIP there, Urenco, and then certainly the Delaware Basin and Central Basin Platform. Tons of energy infrastructure there, but that's not where the decisions in New Mexico are being made. It's where a ton of the revenue for the state is coming from, but it's not where the decisions are being made necessarily.
That is exactly correct. The decisions are made from the population centers along the Rio Grande corridor, and those, generally speaking, are going to be a very more environmentally conscious with respect to renewables than either the Southeast or the Northwest.
Right. I think we should reframe this because, just like I said earlier, to me, it's environmentally ignorant to think that a more diffuse and less energy dense technology is better for the environment.
Let me come back to being an adult in the room. You cannot run a mechanized society at any reasonable cost without having something available 24/7.
People understand that where it's very cold often. So how do we change this? What would be a pathway to helping people realize that, hey, dispatchable power is really, really valuable. Energy dense fuels are awesome. How do we help convince people of that?
If I knew the answer to that question, I'd be a lot richer.
Like, I'd be doing it.
I'd already be doing it, be a lot richer than I am today.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, Mark, I've got some ideas on that. I have two beautiful daughters that married two Europeans, one in Ireland and one in the Netherlands, and I had an opportunity to see firsthand their energy policies, and they've been an abysmal failure. And we're just repeating history. The physics simply don't allow enough energy for wind and solar. And what makes wind and solar viable is natural gas to back it up, because you can turn on the natural gas electrical generation on and off. You can't with the nuclear or coal, for example. And so I think we're going to wise up. I think as the cost of energy goes up and up and up, as it is in Europe, they're going back to coal. They're burning firewood. I mean, it's they're going to nuclear. I mean, that's the way to go. I mean, and Finland just opened up a nuclear power plant. Of course, it was a large facility, I think 1,800 megawatts, and unfortunately, it cost 3 times what it should have. And you've got to get your cost containment down. But I think the American people are going to be sick and tired of paying high power and light bills and natural gas bills. This winter alone in San Juan County, our power and light bills and gas bills almost doubled because there was kind of an energy shortage in San Juan County. What happened was California didn't have enough gas storage and they had to buy on the spot market. And the cost of natural gas skyrocketed to an all-time high. Now it's dropped like a rock now, so everybody ought to get some benefits. But that 4 months, it really hurt people. And I think that's going to wake up. The consumer's going to wake up. And we're used to very affordable energy in this country that makes us competitive. China is going, they're going strong with coal. I mean, they have no alternative, and they're going with nuclear as well. Wind and solar, again, it's just not helping China. It's just not adequate, So I think the math is going to help us. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but anyway, people's pocketbook is hurting right now.
Yeah, the people that I know that are plugged in Europe, yeah, energy prices are extremely high, and that has forced people to reconsider and become more energy literate about what it really takes to power the world and power humanity. And so while it's a sad story and you wish that you wouldn't have to teach people this way, sometimes the most effective way to teach the child that the stove is hot is say, well, go ahead and touch it. you know? So we're a fan of nuclear, and Larry, I know you said earlier that you're not optimistic on New Mexico bringing more into the state, but again, I'd like to just circle back to that. It seems very strange to me. What would have to change in New Mexico for them to get behind this idea of, hey, yeah, let's convert some of these coal plants into nuclear plants. Let's bring some microreactors into the oil field and power operations there. What would this take?
Well, there will have to be a shift, really a monumental shift in the regulatory environment, which I don't see occurring until the lights go out. Now, when that happens, the first cold winter day in Albuquerque with a blackout or a brownout may start changing some opinions. But I don't see nuclear being an option in this state until something pretty dramatic occurs.
That's tragic.
I can't disagree.
Yeah, because you've literally got the birth and the long-term resting place of nuclear fuel there, meaning Urenco, where they enrich it, and the waste isolation pilot project, where they're storing the spent nuclear fuel from the military, and it's like two demonstrations.
Well, and Urenco is creating these pellets that go into these fuel rods. So that's the birth of the fuel system for the nuclear industry. And those folks have absolutely been a magnificent addition to this community. And I wouldn't think there would be, I can't see any reason why Holtec at the other end of the cycle wouldn't have been a great addition to the community also. But there is a lot of animosity over past transgressions with respect to mining, with respect to the Trinity site, and those folks claiming they were damaged as downwinders. Uh, that is, that's a tough hill to climb. It's going to be difficult to overcome.
James, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, the Navajo Nation is closer to you, right? And there's been a lot of, yeah, just like Larry said, history that people feel like was unjust in one way or another. Has that been your perspective, being local to kind of the Navajo Nation with a lot of the mines? And give me a little more.
Yeah, the Navajo community is been adversely affected with all the these 50-year-old mines, 60-year-old mines using poor technology, poor environmental controls, and it's hurt those communities. You fast forward to today, just like horizontal drilling and multi-stage hydraulic fracturing, it's just a game changer. And modern techniques to mine uranium is remarkably safer and better. But you got these legacy mine sites, and they haven't been cleaned up, and they've caused some environmental harm. And they feel like they've been shortchanged in those remedies, and that the government hasn't done their job in cleaning this up. And that's wrong. I mean, they have, the Navajo community have every right to be upset. And so it is a tough obstacle to overcome. But the success stories in southeast New Mexico and those facilities down there, that they have demonstrated what you can do with the proper technology and engineering and so forth. But these old legacy mines, they need to be cleaned up. And there is some help. There's been some help in that regard.
That's been my perspective when I've studied it also. Yeah, well, so there's a lot of old sites that they used old technologies or rudimentary, very elementary technologies, like literally pick and shovel and digging holes in the ground without any ventilation systems, a lot of it without mechanistic extraction solutions, without respirators, right? And these are exposures to hazards that we know of and we're aware of. And like you said, it needs to be cleaned up. But often, if there's not a capital source or demand to clean it up, to incentivize cleaning it up, then it doesn't, right? It just gets abandoned. And I don't know, I view a revitalization of the nuclear industry as an opportunity to potentially help go and clean that up. Meaning, like, oh, we know there's a bunch of uranium here. Let's invest more, and if there's a higher demand for this material, then we'll be able to reclaim a lot of these old mines and clean it up and mine a lot more of it. But would you agree?
Mark, you're exactly right. The challenge that the mining industry has, not only uranium, copper, steel, whatever, it's cheaper to do it internationally. They not in my backyard. We'll get all the rare earth minerals we can from third world countries, and they don't want to develop our resources here. Alaska is rich in mineral resources, rare earth mineral resources. Unfortunately, the federal government owns most of those lands, and access is just not there. It's like Larry Scott said. It's hard to go. It's hard to cut through the regulatory, environment, and so there's no incentives to reclaim those old mines and recycle those tailings and put it to beneficial use, and creates a lot of good paying jobs. But the government's in the way, unfortunately, the federal government in this case.
Okay, so what can we do then to perhaps move towards? And I know, Larry, you kind of answered this, that you're not sure. If we knew, then we'd be doing it already. But small steps, what can the world do to move this conversation in a positive direction?
I think it has to start with the education system. We have to start educating teachers to the benefits of reliable, inexpensive power and the pitfalls of having to rely on windmills and solar panels. And the technical assessments have to be brought to the level that those folks can understand and articulate to their students. And you're a generation away, I think, from having people that can understand all of the consequences of these policies.
Education. I support education. What do you think, James?
Well, there's a lot of misinformation there. There's a lot of fear and intimidation. I can't tell you how many committee hearings before the Energy Committee that we're all going to die in 12 years. And I just don't think, that's ridiculous. We're going to die of a heart attack before we die of climate change or cancer or God forbid, natural illnesses. And it's misinformation, it's miseducation, it's scare tactics, and we've got to overcome that. That's not easy. The education community, they're bombarded with a lot of woke ideology, and it's hard to overcome, but we must. As a nation, we have to come to our senses and become adults in the room.
Part of the problem is if you're a scientist that is representing that we really don't have that bad a problem, there aren't any research grants coming your way. These environmentalists that are advocating for dramatic reductions in CO2 to save the planet have turned these representations into profit centers. They generate research dollars, and I think in many cases the goals and objectives aren't actually objective. They favor worst case scenarios to generate more research dollars. And I don't know how you stop that. It's the environmental calamity community has turned their concerns into profit motives.
Mark, I want to say something positive. That sometimes the environmental community they kind of they press their luck a little bit. And with this governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, I know there were some disputes. She wanted parties to come up with some solutions, to compromise. The environmental community said no, and the governor told them to jump in the lake. And I'm just being kind in using those, that description. And so, the pendulum is going to swing. It will. And I have to be optimistic. I have 7 children, and 2 are in the business, and I have 8 grandchildren, 1 on the way. So, let's go. We need to make sure they have a great future.
I like that. So my dad was in the oil and gas business too, and he always said, "Son, I don't think I was smart enough to figure out how to get us off this rock, but I could at least kick the can down the road long enough till someone smarter than me showed up and figured out how we could." And so, it's fitting that you talk about, educating the next generation and your grandkids potentially solving the problem, right? And generating a solution that gets us to be even more prosperous than we are today. Obviously, you can see pictures in my background for those that are looking on video, right? I love space and thinking about how we can continue exploring and explore our planet and the universe. But that's why I love energy, and I love all that it does for humanity. So why don't you guys both leave us on an optimistic note? I know, James, you kind of just did, but what gives you hope when you look at the energy landscape today? What makes you hopeful and optimistic about, we're going to continue to keep the lights on, and there's a lot of promise for the future?
Well, I think we need to have time to do a viable energy transition. And, again, wind and solar is popular now, and you need natural gas to back it up. And so we're in this together, and we're a large oil and gas producing state, 2nd largest oil producing state. I don't know, 9th or 10th in gas production. And so we need to take advantage of those assets, and hopefully nuclear it may not be on the horizon here in San Juan County, but in other states, other friendlier states, these small nuclear reactors may really be a game changer and give us that base load fuel that we need at affordable prices. So we need cheap energy. That's our claim to fame in the U.S., and we don't want to go in the other direction. So I think economics will prevail.
I like that answer. What about you, Larry?
Yeah, the pendulum has swung too far to the left, and eventually the consequences of that swing will be realized. And once these policies hit deep enough into people's pocketbooks, I believe it will start to swing back toward the middle. And beyond that, I am not very optimistic. And I hate to say that, but fighting the fights that we fight daily in the New Mexico legislature, it's very discouraging.
Well, maybe next time I'm in Hobbs, I can have lunch with you, and I can tell you some stories that might give you some more hope. So,
all right, love to do that, Mark.
Cool. Larry, James, or should I say Representative Scott, Representative Strickler, it was excellent to talk to you. I really appreciate it today. Thanks so much for the time, guys.
Okay, Mark. Thank you.